All right, let's dive in, and I will try and keep an eye on participants who might be in the waiting room. Good morning, and welcome to Greenwald's monthly coffee break. I am Lisa Greenwald, the CEO of Greenwald Research. I'm also the project director on the Greenwald side for the EBRI Greenwald Retirement Confidence Survey. It's end of summer, and we were looking for something to share this month. And so it was a good opportunity for me to do something a little selfish, a little narcissistic. I was really curious and have been wondering for some time um, about diving into some of the retirement confidence survey data as it relates to women in their 30s and 40s. That's me. Might be many of us on this call as well. So we took a look with the help of my colleague Ravneet Sandhu on the Greenwald team at how women in their 30s and 40s were responding to some of our key questions. And so that's what we're going to be sharing with you today. If you have not tuned into a Greenwald coffee break before, these are small, informal, and short discussions. So I am hoping to have some questions, and feel free to pop on camera and off of mute to ask. I will also try and keep my eye on the chat. So we certainly encourage you to chime in. So without further ado, grab your coffee or tea or water for the morning, and I will show you what we found when we looked at women in their 30s and 40s. My screen doesn't want to cooperate, but there we go. All right, just a quick overview for those less familiar with the Retirement Confidence Survey. We just completed the 35th year, that was 2025. That study was fielded in January of 2025, as RCS always does. It was released publicly in April. Believe it or not, we're gearing up for the 2026 RCS. So if you find this interesting or want to talk more about sponsoring this study, we are looking for 2026 sponsors. The official kickoff is in early October. RCS 2025 had a general population sample of 2,047 Americans. We categorized them into roughly 1,000 workers and 1,000 retirees. Obviously, today we're showing a much smaller, narrower segment of that. We're looking just at our women in their 30s and in their 40s and their male counterparts. So one of the most important things to share, because it influences just about everything else we're going to look at, is sort of the profile of women in their 30s and 40s, right? Across the board, right? Women in their 30s and 40s report less full-time employment than their male counterparts, lower incomes, less likely to be 100K, but it just all skews lower, and less likely to save for retirement, right? So all of those things, particularly lower incomes, have a huge influence on retirement confidence and outlooks for current finances and future finances, right? So we are looking generally, when we look at women versus men, at a group of women with lower incomes than their male counterparts. And that has a great deal of influence here. There's some things that go hand in hand along with that, right? Lower incomes means lower assets, means less likely to work with an advisor. But we're going to talk a little bit about advisor use. All right, so some background stuff. Interestingly enough, the broader financial economic concerns of men and women in their 30s and 40s are largely the same. They share the same concerns. At the top of the list for both those in their 30s and their 40s is cost of living, making it harder to save. The second on that list is concern that the US government will make significant changes to the American retirement system. This is one of the only places where we see women in their 40s pop above their male counterparts from a statistically significant standpoint. right? So by the time women hit their 40s, they're getting a little bit more concerned that some of our infrastructure around retirement might change. Not too surprisingly, women and men in their 30s are put housing costs increasing as a higher concern, right? Number 3 on that list for those in their 30s, comes down the list just a smidge for those in their 40s, whereas those in their 40s start to worry about having to make substantial spending cuts due to inflation a little bit more. So along with lower employment, lower income, lower retirement savings, women in both their 30s and 40s are less likely to agree that they have enough savings to handle an emergency expense compared to their male counterparts, and by a pretty wide margin, right? 55% of women in their 30s compared to 70% of men in their 30s, 51% in the 40s compared to 74% of men in their 40s. And if you look at the data cut on their current savings and investments, there's this alarming 25% of women in their 30s saying their current savings and investments is lower than $1,000. Hand in hand with all of that, we see that women in both their 30s and their 40s are more likely to agree that debt is negatively impacting their ability to save for retirement. For women, it's 2/3 in their 30s. It does come down to 56%, some progress as time goes on, as we age. But still, we remain more concerned that debt's impacting our savings than our male counterparts. We see really similar numbers on the right for well-being, right? Household well-being, just about a third of women rate their household's financial well-being positively in their 30s. That's notably lower than the 54% of men who say the same. Women also in their 30s are less likely to say their emotional well-being is excellent or very good compared to nearly 2/3 of men. That lower rating on household financial well-being carries with women from their 30s to their 40s, right? In fact, it doesn't really get better. 35% in your 30s and 33% in your 40s. But we do, in fact, come up on emotional well-being. What's really interesting on these well-being ones maybe isn't the story happening with women, it's what's happening with men. So men are coming down, 54% feeling good about their household financial well-being in their 30s, down to 47. It's a little, it's directional, but they're coming down. And then their emotional well-being is coming down from 64% in their 30s to 47% in their 40s. So a little bit of an interesting story with men on well-being that we didn't expect to find because my focus was women in their 30s and 40s. All right, so all these things sort of hang together. As you might expect, women in their 30s and 40s are much more likely than their male counterparts to agree with the statement that retirement preparation makes them feel stressed. Right, we see that on a lot of metrics. Women more likely in surveys across the board to say that they are experiencing stress. And what we see on the right is that 50% of women in their 30s are saying that retirement savings is not a priority relative to the current needs of their family. That's actually equal to men in their 30s. But what's not equal is that both women and men in their 30s are less likely than the total Gen Pop population, more likely than the total Gen Pop population to agree with that. Meaning, this is a life stage. Both men and women in their 30s are more likely to say retirement savings are not a priority for them right now. Where we really start to see a change is men in their 40s. At 33%, men in their 40s are, to say it in reverse, more likely to be prioritizing retirement, less likely to be agreeing that it's not a priority. So what does this all look like for retirement confidence? You can probably guess. Not good. So women in their 30s, about 58% report being very or somewhat confident that they will have enough money to live comfortably throughout their retirement years. That is 20 percentage points lower than men in their 30s. And it does not change much by the time women hit their 40s. Still 58% on the net, and actually get a little less very confident in their 40s. Right. And this pattern holds for all different aspects of retirement, right? Women in their 30s and women in their 40s are by and large less likely to be confident in all different aspects of retirement planning. I think the one that's particularly important is what's at the bottom. The bottom is having enough money to pay for long-term care during retirement. It's at the bottom for those in their 30s and those in their 40s. In the 30s, women are different than men in their lack of confidence. They're lower, but it starts to even out a little. When you start to look at women in their 40s, that 50% is not significantly lower than the 58% of men also concerned about long-term care during retirement, right? Again, one of the interesting stories here is if you follow the male bar from 30s to 40s, their confidence, dare I say realism setting in, seems to come down a little bit on some of these attributes. So women here are not statistically less likely in their 30s to agree with statements about feeling knowledgeable about their finances. But we can all look at those bars. Those bars are directionally different, right? This is probably more a function of sample size than anything else. We have 69% of women in their 30s feeling like they have the right educational and support resources to help with a major health or financial event in their lives, right? Feeling knowledgeable about managing savings and investments for the future. 62% of our women in their 30s agree with that compared to 85% of men. Women are also less likely at 56% to agree that as a child or young adult, they were taught how to save and invest for the future, right? Not statistically significant, but definitely directionally telling, right? Along with that, ownership of various financial instruments, having plans, looks lower, right, for our women, less likely to have life insurance, long-term care insurance, annuity. Most importantly, I think, is the 22% of women in their 30s who say they have a formal financial plan compared to the nearly half of men who say that they have one. There's a real lag there in sort of account ownership and planning instruments, but even in discussion and thinking about retirement, right? You can see a few red arrows here on our women in their 30s bars, right? half of women have discussed with their spouse or partner when they hope to retire and what they hope retirement will be like. Just chatted with their partner in their 30s. Only 53% of women say they've done that. 64% of men say they've done that. Not statistically significant, but you can see directionally what's going on here. Thinking about how to occupy your time here, we do have a statistically significant difference, right? 41% of women have even thought about what they're going to do, spend their time in retirement. This is in their 30s, compared to 56% of men. What's also really interesting to call out here is where some of those red arrows are. We've got a couple of them on Social Security related items, right? Women in their 30s being less likely to think about claiming age for Social Security and the impact that that can have. And also being less likely down there at the bottom at 28% to even look and review the amount of Social Security that they might receive at their planned retirement age. A very unfortunate, not surprising result is that 33% of women in their 30s who say they have a plan for how they would cover an emergency or big expense in retirement. But again, they are less likely to have emergency savings right now. So I don't think it's unrealistic to believe they haven't thought about how they're going to do it in retirement if they haven't thought about how they're going to do it now. All right. So following the numbers, following income, savings, etc. Again, probably not a huge surprise that women in their 30s and women in their 40s are less likely to report that they're currently working with a financial advisor. Right? 25% in their 30s, 28% in their 40s, lagging the slightly above 4 in 10 men who say they're working with an advisor. What I think is really interesting is what's on the right. It's the bar with the little green arrow. Women in their 40s, 58%, who are not currently working with an advisor, say they are likely to in the future. They want it. They want advice, right? In the 30s, that's about equal, 50-50 between the men and women. But by 40s, women are more likely to say they want to work with an advisor than men are. So the last thing I want to show you is what they want help with, right? So this question asks, if you have an advisor or you feel likely to work with one in the future, what things do you want help with? And it was written as, what do you want that advisor to help you with? But quite honestly, I have a hard time imagining this list looks any different. If you were to say just advice in general, whether that's through a coach or a well-being program or an actual advisor, this is just what people want help with, right? So very top of that list is always figuring out, have I saved enough, right? It's the top response for women in their 30s. It's the second top response for women in their 40s. And it's just a little flip-flop. In 30s, our women, half of them would like to know more about how to save and invest outside of their workplace plan. In the 40s, that's the number one response. Creating that plan for long-term care in retirement was at the bottom of that confidence list. This is where they want help, both men and women, though in their 30s, women are a little bit more tuned into that at 49%, wanting help with long-term care compared to about a third of men. If we look then at reducing debt for our 30-something women, 4 in 10 want help reducing debt. That's higher than men. What's really interesting is a decade later, give or take, right? Look where reducing debt is on that list, right? So 30s, maybe a little more focused on holistic well-being, getting my ducks in a row. Ideally, then debt's in a better place, and it drops on the sort of needs list for both men and women in their 40s, but more notably for women. Reducing debt drops. I do think it's interesting that college savings for a child stays sort of at the bottom of this list, for both men and women, both in their 30s and in their 40s. Though there is a drop, 23% of women say they're seeking help with college savings for a child in their 30s. It's 11% by their 40s. And that may be because they've done it, hopefully. And hopefully they haven't just given up on us. So those are some of my takeaways from the RCS. I think, it's unfortunate news that women seem to lag their male counterparts through these very key decades for retirement planning, for financial planning, even in a broader sense. So I'm going to pause, see if there are any comments, questions, ideas for me to dig a little deeper. I will gladly take anything you've got to throw at me this morning. All right. Quiet bunch.
I have a question. Um, in terms of communications to retirement plan participants, it seems like it might be useful to think about different types of messages for males in their 30s and females in their 30s, same for the 40s. Do you have any thoughts about targeting messages with the expectation of these differences in where people are?
I don't know if I would target differently, but I might expect to see different receptivity, right? I mean, I think what we see for women is there's some sort of basic housekeeping that needs to be done in the 30s, right? Am I saving enough? I need to reduce debt. I don't have emergency savings, right? Little bit more of that financial wellness and or holistic comprehensive financial planning need. Well, maybe not need, receptivity for women in their 30s. Whereas we're seeing an interesting confidence in men in their 30s that seems to diminish in their 40s, right? So we might need different messages, but I think it might be a 30s conversation versus a 40s conversation, not necessarily a male versus female conversation. Someone asked if we have also looked at how these attitudes change for respondents in their 50s. I have not yet. Like I kicked off saying, I very selfishly looked at the 30s and 40s. But we can do another coffee break. We'll look at how it keeps changing through the decades. We do know generally confidence rises with age. I can say that much. All right. Well, hearing and seeing nothing else, I want to thank you again for joining us on this last Friday of August before a holiday weekend. We do these coffee breaks monthly, as I mentioned, and I hope you will join us again. You can also see the recordings of our coffee breaks on our website. We get those posted in a fairly timely fashion. And lastly, for those who don't know, Greenwald is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. So in addition to our monthly coffee breaks, we're hosting some more formal webinars with outside experts throughout the year discussing a variety of topics. And our celebrations are going to be culminating in a first ever for Greenwald in-person health and wealth symposium that will start the evening of November 4th and run all day November 5th here in Washington, D.C. We've got more information coming out on how to register for that. It is a complimentary event for our clients and industry allies, and we hope you will come celebrate with us. Have a wonderful long weekend, everyone.